This is Tomo. I'd like to talk about Japanese domination through Chinese tactics of super limited invisible war today. I suppose it is also happen same situation about presidential campaign in the United States at present. China's super limited invisible war was announced in 1999 by a corner of the People's Liberation Army of China. After that, it has a great impact around the world. Looking to the current situation in China and Russia, like communist countries, I think both countries have doing such kind of super limited invisible war. I suppose Chinese domination by this type of super limited invisible war is being completed in Japan at present. This report shows that kind of story. What is Chinese super limited invisible war? Not only the normal war with regular army, but also non-regular forces using non-military organization. This is a way, such as diplomatic tactics, national terrorism, financial cyber attacks controlled by public relations in each country, and so on. It ignores nationality of domestic ethics, and even also it controls countries' law using of psychological and ideological tactics, and so on. It is a very nasty war. I think that China is currently carrying out a super limited invisible war in another country. After that, as a fact, China is using diplomatic and cyber war a lot and steal information anytime. In addition to public relation warfare, psychological warfare, using a lot of legal warfare. For example, in the East China Sea and the South China Sea is a paramilitary operation which does not connect to the war using formal military operation. Such kind of paramilitary operation is undergoing Asian countries with territorial problems in the South China Sea, as you know, using private fishing boats and untrained civilian army. Without using of naval battleships, China is trying to use of paramilitary means such as maritime policy, surveillance vessels around sea in Senkaku Island of Japan. Well, China, which has a traditional tactics of winning without fighting, is practicing a fight that makes full use of various means without formal military force. Right now, Prime Minister Abe has quit in Japan, and the Prime Minister's election campaign has been started, like United States. As a fact, it was Chief Cabinet Secretary Mr. Suga who led Prime Minister Abe's political administration behind Abe, wasn't it? And also, he was supported by Secretary General Nikai. Secretary General Nikai and Chief Cabinet Suga, who was Chief Cabinet Secretary, were reporting that they are working together to achieve Japan's domination through these kinds of China's super limited invisible war. I want to say that. It is said that Chief Cabinet Secretary Suga currently has lots of his advantage in the Prime Minister's election campaign. We can realize the problem is that Chief Cabinet Secretary Suga has a lot of advantages position in the election campaign if he uses his current position. This is the reason the Chief Cabinet Secretary is a confidential expenses. Officially, a Cabinet Secretariat compensation fee. In order for the government to carry out the affairs or business of the country smoothly and effectively, there is a secret expenses that can be used in a functional way of most appropriate judgment. This is expended more than 1 billion yen every year in Japan. Suga can use it at his decision as a chief cabinet secretary. This budget has no public check system in Japan. This money has possibility to use with his presidential campaign in Japan, so that system of the chief cabinet secretary running to the prime minister's campaign in Japan. I think it's wrong and very funny system. Don't you think so that? The chief cabinet secretary should have set up an election system to select the Japanese prime minister as chief cabinet secretary until next prime minister will be decided in Japan. I think he should be in a position to watch Japanese presidential election. So, if he apply for candidate of presidential campaign from his position, it's not a good idea to use confidential money to get his prime minister's election on himself, right? This plan has been done under Secretary General Nikai and Chief Cabinet Secretary Suga at present. Related with China's super limited invisible war, as I called this one. The leader were called to be pro-China group. The leader who was influenced by China super limited invisible war. If they can increase power in Japanese government, China's control of Japan with the super limited invisible war like that will be completed, and Japanese government will ignore the opinion of Japanese people. Then, if Prime Minister Suga is finally established in Japan, it is likely to be the same situation of the nation, which disregards the people's opinion, like a communist nation such as China. I think so. Therefore, I'd like to think about this problem in today's report. Let's go. So, what I want to insist here means China's domination by the super limited invisible war in Japan. This is a strategy advocated by two active officers of China's People's Liberation Army. Chinese super limited invisible war was announced in 1999 and has had a great impact both globally and socially, as I said before. It has been also warned in the United States about this type of super limited invisible war, like a presidential campaign in the United States at present. And we are just faced to crisis with China's domination by the super limited invisible war at present. About CSIS in the United States report, as I said before. The International Institute for Strategic Studies in United States. There have been these type of reports of China's influence in Japan. Let's read a little bit now. Japanese government finally announced the suspension of travel visa for Chinese travelers on March 5 due to coronavirus happened in Wuhan of China. As you know, from China on March 5, it was too late. You can realize that entry in Japan of Chinese people was suspended from China with travel visa, right? And on the same day, the Japanese government officially announced Xi Jinping state's visit was postponed due to the COVID-19. On the same day, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe officially have postponed my invitation to Japan. However, until that time, general travel visa from China has not been suspended so far. I think that there was influence by Chinese super limited invisible war, as I said, that visited Xi Jinping. According to a recent German Marshall Fund report in CSIS report, China's strategy around the world includes weaponing the Chinese economic coercion. And they are using the Chinese economy as a weapon to create an economic intimidating story to dominance, such as propaganda and disinformation. And they gave the wrong information with propaganda, relying on elite intermediaries, relying on the elite, instrumentalizing the Chinese diaspora, which means Chinese immigrants. In Japan, Chinese are going to control Japanese people and embedding authoritarian control also. Many of these tactics in China appear in everywhere of government mass communication and also YouTube commute in Japan and same situation as United States. Don't you think, Sangla? We can realize everywhere to control authority in Japan. It shows truly a super limited invisible war, isn't it? Let's read this left line for a moment in CSI report. Akimoto belonged to a powerful Mr. Nikai faction of the Liberal Democratic Party in Japan. It is a faction of the General Secretary of Nikkei, was selected by Wakayama Prefecture in Japan. This is a pro-China group of the Liberal Democratic Party in Japan. This group is called the faction of Mr. Imai and Nikkei. Imai used to be a bureaucrat at the Bureau of Economy, Trade and Industry in Japanese government. Imai insisted to former Prime Minister Abe to take friendly strategy and friendly policy for China. What about business-based policy? Mr. Nikkei also donated 5 panda animals from China to his hometown Wakayama, a zoo in Wakayama Prefecture. And as Japan's special ambassador to China, Xi Jinping of China, in April 2019, BRI means the policy of the Belt and Road Initiative in China. Nikkei insisted on cooperating in this BRI, one belt and one road, without listening to the opinion of the United States. Nikkei also insisted that Xi Jinping should be invited to Japan as a state guest, and also Chief Cabinet Secretary Suga, now President in Japan, was also insisting. When Prime Minister Suga of Japan is selected, this invitation to Japan as a state guest of Xi Jinping will be realized, I suppose. This will be most dangerous, isn't it? If Prime Minister Suga were realized in Japan, I'm reporting a concern that the rule of China's super limited, invisible war would be established completely in Japan. I suppose Chief Cabinet Secretary Suga and Secretary General Nikkei seems to have been entertaining the Communist Party of China by entering Japan and go to travel for special reasons. It seems that the in-fact explosion of the new coronavirus in Japan was not able to be stopped by the entry of the Chinese Communist Party member in a special circumstance, realistically because it was hidden from Japanese people. Furthermore, it is thought that the entry of Chinese Communist Party members has become to be government secret strategy because Japanese government has continued to hide the nationality of new coronavirus infected persons in Japan in order to make these Communist Party members entering Japan. Now, let's think about China's super limited invisible war, especially as mentioned above. CSIS United States report influence on Japan suggests Japan's politicians, the media, and other elites are already dominated by China's super limited invisible war. Well, this is also same situation as the Prime Minister's election in Japan. It may be shown by the report that almost mass communication of Japan was reporting victory of Prime Minister Suga from scratch of Prime Minister's campaign in Japan. Former Chief Cabinet Secretary Suga and Secretary General Nikai continue to allow Chinese who have tested positive PCR test to entering Japan and receive free hospital treatment using Japanese citizen taxes. Fourth, it seems that the Chinese takeover of the Japanese family register. I should list the address of the website that was shown about it. Please refer to this content for the problem of the takeover of this Japanese nationality from China. Fifth, we have nurtured administrative officer of Chinese Communist Party members with Japanese fund and scholarship to Chinese Communist Party students. The sixth, PCR test gives priority than Japanese people, including free treatment costs in Japanese hospital. The seventh, lots of important land in Japan was already being sold to Chinese people. The eighth, it is incredible that several ships and air routes from Wuhan city in China, which was the source of the infection coronavirus, even in time of Japanese emergency situation for coronavirus, has been newly established. 9. Even Chinese in Japan who do not pay taxes are taking benefits, such as special benefits of 100,000 yen for Japanese nations in Japan. Number 10. Because of large number of Chinese people continue to entertaining Japan at the time of the declaration of emergency in Japan. I think it was the main cause of new corona infection continue spread in Japan. It means that the government prevention of infection has failed completely. I think this was victory of super limited invisible war in China, as I said, because Japan was dominated by China, super limited invisible war. I mean, Japan will not end in case of coronavirus from China does not converge because of Chinese entry to Japan was never stopped. If China doesn't fully converge on Wuhan pneumonia, the spread of the disease in Japan also will not stop. This is considered to be the result of China's domination of the super limited invisible war. Finally, the Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare is instructing to disclose Japanese hospitals about the nationality of infected people of the new coronavirus. This is the reason why Japan was ruled by China's super limited invisible war. If Chief Cabinet Secretary Suga become Prime Minister of Japan at present, he is Prime Minister now, so it ends up that the rule of super limited invisible war by this China will continue for a long time, isn't it? Because until now, he has been supported for human resource development scholarships in China and also supporting policy in favor of Chinese Communist Party members, right? This is one of facts of how successful China's super limited invisible war. Only 48 Chinese Communist Party officials. This is a member of the Communist Party of China, right? Japanese government pay 585 million yen each year for 48 Chinese government officials only. Japanese government support using money to develop human resources of Chinese Communist Party to study Japanese graduate school in Japan. We support the necessary expenses for Chinese officials getting academic degree. This is also means we are training Chinese spy in Japan. Don't you agree that? In addition to a budget of 600 billion yen is used to support Chinese students from tuition fees. In addition, 10 million yen was used as their living expenses and funding for 1,000 planning members in China is provided with Japanese people blood tax on the Japan. Incredible. In this way, the result of the super limited invisible by China shows concrete policy in Japan. In addition, thinking about scholarship of Chinese students are given about 3.8 million yen for the scholarship grade against 4.8 million yen for Japanese university students. Japanese university students are lending with interest, so they have to pay back in the future. In case of Chinese students, they don't have to return it, and transfer destination is the Chinese embassy. Therefore, because the selection of scholarship students is done by the Communist Party of China, and the orientation also done by the Communist Party of China, there is a great possibility that the family of Chinese Communist Party members or administrative officers in China will be as a Chinese exchange student in Japan. This also shows us training Chinese spies in Japan. Incredible. I think the super limited invisible war of Japan by China was already being established. How about the United States? China's super limited invisible war, as I said, has been realized as another concrete case. How many Chinese have entered Japan? I've told you before, the number of Chinese people entering the country, 880,000 in November 2019, December 230,000, January 2020, 200,000, February 2020, 107,000 Chinese people were entered in Japan. From March, immigrant restrictions were applied. Still, 9,000 people, April 716, even if regulations are executed. The number has increased to 10598 people entering Japan due to special circumstances, isn't it? As you know, you can see that our relationship with China has not been stopped from these facts. Since April, Japanese government have been announced from Japanese government that nobody Chinese people can enter Japan to Japanese people. However, in the fact, the total number of foreigners in April, excluding flight crew members, was 5,312 entered, and Chinese people was 716, Philippines 332 people, Nepal 39 people entered, 654 people from South Korea have also entered Japan at April. Can you believe it? The Japanese government explained this situation as Japanese suppose no problem, but they are really a foreigner, aren't they? And they have various influence. It's too much number during emergency or coronavirus, isn't it? The number of foreigners due to these special cases has suddenly increased to 378 on April 3 and 241 on April 4, was 716. The number of people infected at this time in Japan is April 1st, 2,178, April 2nd, 2,381. If you look at the number of infected foreigners, the upper one is almost 50%, more than 47%. There was so closely relationship between the number of people infected and the number of foreigners entered by special cases. In other words, because it is 0.61 from the statistical function I calculate, there was a correlation, so no matter how much we avoided close distance, submit Japanese, and washed hands in Japan, infected people had been entering Japan for a long time. Continue. Coronavirus was getting spread and spread in Japan, as you understand. I hope it was only April, but it was not only April. In May, even when the situation of emergency in Japan was declared in May, still infected person was allowed to entering Japan. I think this is mainly due to the Chinese super limited invisible war, such like that. There was a reality that Japanese government couldn't stop their entry in Japan at all. Incredible, especially in May, 809 Chinese entered, 515 Filipino, 1,196 Nepal people entered Japan. However, there are no flights from Nepal to Japan, I wonder. So it seems that more than half of the Chinese flights came in Chinese passport. In other words, I think Chinese people come in with Nepal's passport, I suppose. Same situation in June. 2,147 Chinese entered Japan at the time of declaration of emergency. In June, you can see June, 2,737 Chinese people entered Japan. Still, I think it's more than double because entry regulation were easing in August. It is clear the spread of the infection of the new coronavirus cannot be prevented in Japan in such situation. On the other hand, in Taiwan, we can see there are closing from China against Japan as targeting China in particular. Then they were closing these entrances so that it is said to be the only country in the world that has succeeded in preventing Chinese infection. Well, Japan should have done it that way too. Couldn't. We failed to prevent Chinese infection after failure to prevention coronavirus. Japanese government said to the new coronavirus was nothing to be afraid. Don't worry about it. Nobody died. Japanese government told us that there was so few death rates that we didn't care about. We are going to accept immigration from China more and travelers. In addition to go to travel campaign to turn on the economy to activate more. And they were doing irresponsible things for Japanese people. It seems that there was evidence for dominated with such as Chinese super limited invisible war. It was Secretary General Nikai and Chief Cabinet Secretary Suga who were the mastermind of former Prime Minister Abe that establishes such a rule. We should criticize Prime Minister Abe, but in fact, it was Chief Cabinet Secretary Suga and Secretary General Nikai was behind Prime Minister Abe's administration. That's the reason why Chinese people could not be shut out, even in an emergency in Japan. Furthermore, the Chinese are allowed to entering Japan. Although in China, the medical expenses of the new coronavirus were paid by individuals. Japanese government take Chinese for free charge of medical treatment in Japan. According to the official website of the National Health Administration of the Japanese version of People's Network China on April 16, 2020. Based on the current situation of prevention and suppression of corona pneumonia from the fact that the overall prevention of importing cases outside and preventing from increase again in China. In China, notice on medical expenses payment related issue for foreign patients with new coronavirus pneumonia. The notice clearly states that the use of medical expenses for foreign patients who did not have basic medical insurance in China is a personal payment. In this way, China, the cost of treatment foreign infected people with the new coronavirus was dependent by individual pays. Even if Japanese government still take free charge for Chinese people. From the point of view of interdependence, Japan also should respond with insurance. I think it's all right to say that non-insured foreigners must be payment with actual expenses or personal pays. I wonder why they were free charge still. It is not possible to do it in Japan. That is the main reason why Japanese government has policy which make friends with this Chinese Communist Party member. In addition, in South Korea, if the domestic health protection measures are violated, that means if foreigners have positive case in PCR test in coronavirus, the entire cost treatment must be paid by the personal expenses. That is reasonable thinking, but not Japan. Recently, in Japan, seems to have decided to do PCR inspection as a departure point entering Japan. I think, in addition, PCR inspection is executed again in Japan. If this PCR test was wrong or fake, in other words, in case of test positive, they have violating domestic health protection measures for foreigners who are found to be infected, just like in Korea. I think we should implement same system in which all treatment costs are dependent by themselves. Don't you agree that? But nothing to do in Japanese government. I can't believe it. Why we can't do it? Because it is simple reason. In the political system of Japan, which is occupied already by the Chinese super limited invisible war like United States, I suppose. Don't you agree that? By the way, the cost of treatment was dependent for foreigners such as Thailand, Australia in the United States, there are no national regulation on medical fees, such as medical system in Japan. Each medical hospital can freely decide medical fees, right? It is said that non-insured foreigners are charged a high cost. Therefore, the South Korean government also changes the law so that the treatment fee can be charged to the affected person of the foreigner who enters the country with a new corona infection. Because corona infection was not identified easy looking, right? So it was first cases around the world. That kind of thought has been reported recently in other countries. In addition, in Singapore, Ministry Health set on March 9 that about tourists and foreigners who enter the Singapore country on short-term visas. Singapore government announced that inpatient treatment in the case of infection with the new coronavirus will be self-paying from the 7th of the same month. So, in Japan, also, it's time to take a system like this way. But nothing to do until now. I can't believe it. It's a Japanese political system that is dominated by a super limited, invisible world and is likely to be a member of the Communist Party of China. I'm wondering until now why Japanese government can do or not that things. If Chief Cabinet Secretary Suga in Japan and Secretary Control Nikai take more control of Japanese politics, such things will accelerate it more and more and become out of. It may be done. So again, China's super limited, invisible world was showed, following from 1 to 12 items, as you can see. I take up here. It's all actually being done as a basis for why Chinese super limited invisible world is being dominated in Japan. That's why I'm reporting it now. Seriously, it's okay in the United States situation now. So, former Chief Cabinet Secretary Suga was in a position where he can use to spend more than 1 billion yen as confidential expenses of Japan. If he can use this budget to campaign for Japanese Prime Minister, this should not be done as a system itself. Don't you agree? In addition, it should not be necessary to give the power for a pro-China group in Japan. What I expect is for the Hosoda Aso faction of Liberal Democratic Party in Japan. I hope them to think again according to think about it, because Japanese people can't do anything. So, as a Japanese, what is the right policy for Japan? The person who can carry it out must be chosen by the Japanese politician who represent Japan one by one, each clean vote in election was due course. But Japanese politicians should not be bought in the person who expand the power of pro-China group up to now. But we can't. So I hope Japanese politicians can think it again, but nothing to do. For that purpose, I have created this movie in a rush. By all means, I would like you to think about Japanese violation, Japanese situation at present, such as dominated with Chinese super limited invisible war. It seems same situation as the United States looking for presidential campaign. Don't you think so? That is all I want to talk about it. So, if I can find another problem, I'd like to report it again. See you later. Thank you for watching. Bye.